This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I am your host, Jason Baum, and with me are my co-hosts, Evelyn Coleman and Marcus Merrell. Good to see you both. Thanks for coming back. No, seriously, thanks for coming back and not leaving me alone. Marcus, looks like you're at home.
I'm at home.
It's great. Not on the road, not calling from a telephone booth or a airport or the car pulled over on a highway in Texas somewhere. And Evelyn, you're in a very nice living room. Love the fireplace next to the grand piano.
Probably shouldn't put your piano next to the fireplace or next to the window from a tuning perspective. Marcus agrees with me. You've got two pianists on the podcast.
I played piano when I was 5. Okay, enough about that. We're in a weird mood today, so this is going to be a good episode. Evelyn, why don't you take it away? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the topic, and then we can dive right in.
So today we're talking about the economic impact of testing and quality throughout the years that we've been hosting this podcast and speaking out around quality. We have heard stories and talked about stories where escaped bugs have cost millions, billions of dollars. I think this last year we've seen firsthand some of the tragedies of quality that have occurred and what goes on there. So you definitely want to recap some of that. And then going into sort of the new year, there's some startups and solar companies where you'll have a chance as engineers and folks invested in quality to speak to counterparts in the revenue side of the business and to learn more. So we want to talk about who you should talk to and who you should bug about quality.
Who you should bug about quality. I love that. That's awesome. All right. So Marcus, where do we begin?
Sometimes it's difficult to get folks who are technical to understand why it's important for them to embrace the business side of things. Technical people, as we've seen in a lot of examples, tend to think that the tech will solve all the problems and that we don't need all these people in the middle between us and the customers, and that the product should just sell itself. Or they just don't think about it. I don't mean to paint with a broad brush, but I've been around a while, seen it, and I think that it's just important to understand that without sellers, you can't get your product to market. Without someone to connect you to the customer, it's not easy work, and they have a lot of things that they're juggling, and there's a lot of stuff that they're being asked to be in control of that they are not in control of. And so it's really good to empathize and understand what they go through in order to sell your brilliant work to your brilliant customer. You need these folks, and it's really important to understand why. So I think we wanted to talk today about to try to sell you on embracing sales.
And I think it's easier if we talk about it from sort of either a retail perspective or a business to business perspective. It might be a little harder to make the sort of mental jump between quality and revenue if you're working on quality for an internal tool. But it's a little bit more obvious when we talk retail, and it's a little bit more obvious when we talk business to business as well. Marcus, you've had experience on the retail side of things, or at least the couponing and discounting side of things, where bugs could have potentially cost millions of dollars. Putting yourself in the shoes of someone trying to sell that type of product or trying to make the case of that kind of product after an escaped bug like that, what kind of conversations would you have?
It's difficult when they have sort of a crisis of confidence that happens as a result of a big bug like that. But there's a good story around, hey, that we figured out that happened and we now know how to make sure it doesn't happen again, that kind of thing. But ultimately, I think it's, as an engineer, it's really important to understand why it is so critical to make sure that the fundamental nugget of the transaction can always work. If you're tracking analytics, you're tracking cart checkout, stuff like that, I think that folks in tech tend to treat all bugs and all features kind of with an equal weight. That's, once again, broad brush, but I've seen this happen where I'm working on this feature, so I'm going to work on this feature the same way I work on this other feature. And, if I don't have unit testing and I don't have integration testing in place, I might not understand what this thing I'm working on right now might break in the other side. And for sure, folks in sales don't understand those kinds of deep interrelations. And so getting engineering to understand that not everything is equal and some things are far more important than others, and then getting sales to be confident that you are always focused on those things, even if you may not be working on them right now. The empathy has to go two ways. But what I find often is that there's not enough communication. And what Evelyn's talking about is really having an opportunity to get to understand the minds and motivation behind what drives people's actions.
Yeah, I definitely see this in terms of like the after effects when it comes to postmortems, right? So if you're doing business to business or retail and you're a salesperson and you're accountable to customers around these escaped bugs, oftentimes in order to regain that confidence, customers will ask for postmortems, which will then need the engineers or the quality folks to come back and say, like, what kind of tests are we adding? What are we doing in the future to prevent this? And depending on the feature that was affected, it can really be like pulling teeth. And I think this goes back to what you're saying, Marcus, about like folks not necessarily understanding that different parts of the product, different features have different weight when it comes to selling the product or helping with that sort of quality confidence from a revenue perspective. Have you ever been in a position where you're being asked lots and lots of questions to go over about something that had happened, but you were like, I'm totally ready to move on. I need to get developing. I need to go work on other tests.
Yeah. And what I also find that I think tech people don't sometimes understand is that you'll only get that kind of drill down if they don't think you're on top of stuff. If you have had a history of delivering product that is, the right product at the right time, then if you have a mishap, then they'll kind of tend to believe you that when you say you're on top of this. But if you kind of answer with the kind of like, it depends, or a lot of equivocating or a lot of dancing around it, then they'll start to ask more and more questions and drill down, and they'll ask for a level of detail that they aren't actually going to understand the answers to. They want to measure your confidence in how you're delivering it and make sure that you're kind of on top of things. And that'll only happen if they are not confident that you are on top of things. So if that makes sense, like to me, that's one thing to understand about the business mindset is people tend to trust each other if history has been good. Not always true with engineering, but so interesting.
Is there anything you can do preemptively in your tests from a technical perspective to help smooth or help those conversations go faster, like comments in certain parts of tests or making sure things are labeled certain ways? Have you had any luck with being able to sort of pump out those answers more quickly as to what happened by doing some kind of preemptive work on the quality side?
Well, what you're talking about around comments and logging, that kind of, to me, I see those as tactical. To me, what has helped the most on the business side is strategic, where I think we talked about this a few times before, but I think it bears repeating, is that if I put myself in the mind of the CEO reporting to shareholders, what does he care about? And I think, for our case in the B2C area, it was that, revenue is growing, yes, but also revenue is accurate and we can predict and we can actually measure. And the most important bugs I found and the most important tests I wrote were some of the simplest, where I just sort of said, there are 1,400 ways for the single event of having a cookie drop. There's 1,400 ways to trigger that. I need to make sure that every one of those is covered and that I know the cookie is always being dropped. And I almost feel like you could almost skip the rest of the testing of the product as a whole if you can guarantee that event is happening, because that means revenue is flowing. If that event is not happening, or rather, if you are not testing whether or not that event is happening and you're spending all your time in another area of the product that doesn't matter as much, then CEO will not care that you've spent time making sure that that part works. They will only want to know, does the fundamental nugget of our business actually function every time?
Yeah, well, on the making every transaction count, is it the same for all verticals? Let's move on to like banking, for example, financial institutions. Is it the same, would you say, for financial? What's different?
I do think that there is an answer. It's going to be sort of different for every team, every product. and I'm not going to have a pat answer. I think we could sit here and brainstorm if we're working on a bank, what's the most important thing? And then the second and the third most important. If you are a consumer retail banking customer, what is the most important thing? Is that let's speculate. I'll say what I think, and you see if you agree. As a customer, I need to understand what my balance is, what transactions have happened recently, and that it's all accurate and being calculated correctly, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
fundamentally, you don't even talk about.
Mhm.
So it'd be calculations and it would be
Mhm.
daily versus where I think retail, you could think about load because they have holidays and
Mhm.
and times where things are being sold, times of the year where there's going to be really big spikes in usage are going to be different across regions. So things like GPS testing language and all of that stuff,
Tax
load
accounting, right? Tax
versus
software. Yeah.
banking and finance, like the numbers need to be accurate, but I think it's easier to understand, even if the language is a little bit off, what you're looking at. And just needs to be accurate every single day, every time you open up the app. And it needs to refresh a lot. Like it needs to be updated right now. You can't have a lag. Different types of testing would be the focus for me rather than like different happy paths within the app.
Yeah. It's interesting. You say it's like kind of like not easier, but I get, did you use that word easier or for financial?
I just feel like there's less emphasis on maybe some things that are regional,
Yeah.
besides
Yeah.
making sure that the numbers,
Mhm.
the calculations for
Mhm.
different types of money are accurate.
Would you say the stakes are higher though for financial institutions? Just because if I open my bank app, I'm a consumer and my bank account is zero and I know it's not zero, I'm gonna be pretty mad.
Yeah, I
Like
mean that's
Absolutely. I'm just saying, like, if I open my banking app and the whole thing's written in French,
yeah.
like, I'm not as
Mm.
worried about it versus like the tickets go on sale tomorrow. I open up the app and the whole thing's in German. I can't get around this app that I only use one time a year on a specific date. So I
Are
think
you a
there's,
Swiftie, Evelyn? Is
I'm,
that what you're trying to tell us?
I'm
Is that
not, I was saying that like the numerical
yeah.
accuracy, right? Making sure that the math is mathing, to use like the new speak, is important on finance apps, but like on a retail app, the regional, the branding, the language, and the load, I think would be really big, really high up
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I would still put cart checkout flow at number one, number zero,
Yeah.
right? And then at my previous B2C role, we used to test to make sure that we could process incoming hits to the website, but we didn't always necessarily test the entire flow of everything. And then we figured out that we had some third-party things that couldn't handle the load when we started to exercise some of those paths. So it's like not just us, but also, one of the credit card processing companies or cash transfer types of apps, but also back to banking. I'm thinking about like, if you are looking at it from a consumer point of view, you always need to make sure that a user can transfer funds and that the transfer works, which means the whole workflow, external bank, internal account, everything like that. So I think that everyone in the industry, everyone listening to this could write down a list of, here are the 5 things that are absolutes that I have to make sure work. You could probably expand that to 10, but like there are going to be 5. And then, so to me, to answer your much earlier questions, like that, to me, that's how the tester can orient themselves towards the business. And I think talking to salespeople, talking to marketing folks at these kickoffs and annual meetings, it's one of the most critical things, because you can start to questioning a whole lot of your own assumptions about what areas of the product are most critical to most customers, talking to these folks and saying, hey, maybe I need to be testing this over here as opposed to the stuff I've been working on around, like editing your profile or social media or something like that. So,
Oh, I completely agree. I think this is exactly the time of year to have these conversations and getting in the room, raising your hand, asking, what are the top 5 things that drive revenue in our app, in our business, in our product, but also going a little bit deeper, because people give that list. But if you could ask, just like we did, okay, well, let's compare that to name a different app. Like, how would those things be different? Is there anything we would focus on that such and such app wouldn't focus on? Dig a little deeper than you would. Don't just get the happy path and find out, okay, well, customers are going to do this, 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 and this. Like, think about what their priorities are. Think about whether it's an app that they use every day, so they have everything memorized, but the numbers need to be right, like in finance, or is it something that they only use once a month, once a year? And if you're making big changes, people aren't going to know how to navigate correctly if they don't know where the shopping cart is or the shopping cart's changed. Like, dig a little deeper than just asking, how do we make money off of our product? And how
Right.
can I support that with quality?
So let's do a little thought exercise now. How about a health insurance
Ooh.
software company? Because I don't have a pat answer. I think it's worth a discussion. What would be their top couple items that are most critical to making sure that bugs don't escape to production?
Well, we've got open enrollment, right? So we've got the time thing, just like in retail, where there's spikes in usage, spikes in load. And then there's also going to be a lot of like a big push for changes right before open enrollment, and maybe even a freeze before then. So something about not necessarily the types of tests that you're doing, but the rhythm of your software development lifecycle and the rhythm of quality, making sure that you freeze things in time, like taking into account the time for testing in your quality strategy rather than just the time for development.
So if you look at the suite of what's going on with a big health insurance company, there are doctors who need to interact with the system, doctors in administration, in the office administration. Then there's the user, the person who works for a company who has a contract with this health insurance company. They're using the software. Each of them is going to have slightly different needs. And so I'll throw out kind of a loaded question that you may already know the answer to, like how important is it for that employee whose company works with the insurance company? How important is it for the UI to be like sparkling, pretty, clean, beautiful?
Ooh.
How important is that?
I would say, just for my own personal use, I want it to work. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I care how it looks, like claims, right? A
Yeah.
claims center, I would say, is probably
Yeah.
one of the top places people go to with like a health insurance. Just the ability to submit a claim. I know from my own experience, I've had it where the mobile app didn't work, so I had to use the browser or vice versa. And that's annoying, and people don't want to submit claims. It takes a lot of time. So shorten the process, make it easier. And I think some do it really well. And I don't think people care necessarily too much about how it looks, more about how it functions.
Yeah. I think, and talking about in the flows, like if you're walking through like a claim flow, making sure the questions are relevant. Like, it's the worst thing in the world when you select something and then it opens up a bunch of questions, and one of them is mandatory, like you have to answer, but none of the answers relate to what you wrote. And you're like, am I going to lose my claim because I made a, and then at the very end, every time that happens, every time without a fail, there's a question like, did you answer truthfully to the best of your, like, I did, except for that one question where you forced me to write something because the question was mandatory. So I would completely agree. Things like that. And then also support, like making sure that your contact us page, that the numbers and the links are all working. I think that's maybe something that doesn't get the attention that it should. And sometimes I think that's intentional, right? Like, we're going to put the quality of our contact us page down there because we don't actually want people to contact us. You're listening to this and you're doing quality for a contact us page or support part of an application. Please make it look nice. Please make it work.
There's also the stuff behind the scenes that I was going to mention for financial, maybe not as much retail, well, a little bit with retail, but especially financial and especially insurance, is data privacy and security.
Yeah.
Like, those two things
Fraud
are
prevention.
crucial. Fraud prevention on both, crucial.
Yeah. That was the nice thing at the retail situation that I was in, where we initially didn't really do much with PII, personally identifiable information. We had email addresses and that was it. But as time went on, we added things like cashback, which meant that we had to have accounts and dollar amounts with each customer, which meant we had to start taking more information, which meant we had to go through a whole new set of compliance and all sorts of stuff in order to be able to interact. But it also generated revenue. So there was an ROI associated with it. But as a result of that, we started to have to put the black hat or the white hat hacker on and start to think, okay, well, now there's a whole new set of dimensions for the unhappy path testing that we need to do to make sure that we have this stuff covered. And it's funny because to your point about internal apps, otherwise, there was a whole huge set of apps that we had around content management to make sure that those offers got managed properly and ranked properly and pushed out to the right place. And that was a case where we wrote hundreds and hundreds of automated tests to test all that, make sure all that stuff worked. But I'll bet you only about a dozen of those tests were super critical to the actual workflow. There's an internal audience of about 10 people who use these tools. And if they're not super usable, it's not going to kill anyone. Much as we want to make them great, there's other areas to focus on. So
what about things like accessibility and like that testing, the differences between that for like a banking app or a healthcare app versus a retail app? Like retail apps can have lots of pictures, but banking apps might have spreadsheets and really tiny PDFs that pop up that would be really hard to see just from like a visual perspective. And then nevertheless, I don't know, some of the other things that we've talked about.
Yeah, well, for healthcare and financial, you really kind of don't have a choice. It's going to be set upon you how to do accessibility testing or to what level you do accessibility testing. Retail is going to have a little bit more flexibility in it. But then again, there's a Supreme Court case around that pizza company who said, Supreme Court said, if your site is not accessible and your people cannot order a pizza if they're visually impaired, it's the same as not having a wheelchair ramp on your brick and mortar store. So it is important, but it's not important for those internal tools we're talking about necessarily. Accessibility is hugely important with government. The worst thing that can happen is if you're working on a game or some other thing and your site isn't accessible, they're just going to go to a different product. But with government, there's no competition. You can't go to another place to get the job done that you need to get done.
What about integration testing for government? Because the websites tend to be a little bit older. They tend to change a little bit more slowly. Some of the UI elements tend to be a little bit more behind, but that doesn't mean that the libraries and packages and third parties that you're integrating with are that far behind. So you would need integration testing to make sure that even if you're a little behind, it's still keeping up to date with the latest and greatest in some parts of it, some aspects of it. I might just be, I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I mean, honestly, this is where things like contract testing can help you, because you can run a contract test against an external API that'll tell you whether or not, like we used to do this where we would run a really quick set of API tests against an external resource, a third party that we were testing against. And if their site was down, we just wouldn't run the tests, not waste all that time, something like that. Or if the contract had changed or was broken, we knew we needed to update some stuff, That's why contract testing is huge benefit to any testing strategy.
It is our first episode of the new year. So first off, happy 2025. It's just so weird saying that number. I don't know. Every year of the 2020s, I'm like, how did we get to here? But something that some people like to do is a New Year's resolution. I thought we could end the show with, what are your New Year's resolutions? For me, I'll go first to give you two, because I've been thinking about this. So I don't want to have you guys be too on the hook. But I think for my New Year's resolution, I am going to try and go consistently for walks every day. I started introducing that into my daily regimen more often in 2024, and in 2025 I'm going to commit to doing it even in cold weather, because when it gets cold here, I'm like, do I really need to go for health food needs it kind of, right? No. And then I pay for it come April when I'm like, man, I should have been walking all those months. So I'm going to commit to it. That's my 2025 New Year's resolution. And after this, I'm going for a walk. Okay. Who's next?
Well, so for this year, I was trying to get more movement in as well. I always look to the right because I have a big 365-day calendar next to me, and I put stars whenever I do 20 minutes of working out. And I've got so many stars, not as many as I could have had, but so many stars. And so one of the reasons I was able to do that is this year I took off of taking night classes. For those listeners who are used to me chattering about my nightly fight with math classes that I take in the evening. So I was able to do a lot more movement last year because I wasn't doing work and school simultaneously. However, come January, I'm back on my school. So I'm going to try to keep up with my stars and keep up with the movement, despite all of the schooling that I'm going to be doing in the evenings and all of the peanut M&Ms that I'm going to be eating. So that will be my next challenge. I will try to not get lazy, but also get an A in linear algebra.
There you go. All the stars and all the brains. Okay, Marcus, yours.
I think I'm going to, this is a little bit more introspective maybe. I'm going to try to be more deliberately positive, by which I mean I'm allergic to toxic positivity. Like I would rather somebody be angry all the time and rant constantly as I do than be toxic positive. But I do recognize that I've been ranting a lot, and it's done good for some stuff when I rant about cryptocurrency and generative AI and stuff like that. I actually think I bring something to the table with that to fight other people's toxic positivity, but I don't need to be doing that all the time. I think that there's a lot more good stuff to embrace than I generally recognize, and I'm going to try to make a deliberate effort toward doing that. Otherwise, I'm going to build up my hobby space and get back to work with small electronics and Arduino and stuff like that.
Anytime I find myself slipping into the kind of mood, you know what I mean? Like the world is just bleak and gray. Kids are amazing for resets. I don't know. My kid at 7 years old, the way she looks at the world and processes things is like so wonderful. And I'm like, you know what? There's something to be said about that freshness, that fresh mind that hasn't been corrupted, and like going back to how they see the world. And sometimes I just try to see it through her eyes, and man, I don't know, it's just a happier place to be sometimes through the lens of a child. I don't know. They're good resets.
My kids are basically out of the house, so I've got to heal with my hands, as they say. So woodworking, electronics, sewing, the occasional video game, I got to heal with my hands. So that's
I want to make more time for video games this year.
Oh yeah.
God, me too.
If anyone's playing Elite Dangerous, the Thargoids have invaded the solar system. And
over the holiday,
bad for humanity.
Over the holidays, I saw 8-Bit Christmas. Have you seen that movie? Okay,
Yep.
That is like childhood. It is a great movie. Go out as well. It's January now, but it's
a very millennial childhood movie. It was a little bit. I couldn't identify with some of it.
Well, thank you so much for listening. This was another episode of Test Case Scenario. Thank you for continuing with us. We are going into our 3rd year of this show. We've done 2 years, 2 trips around the sun. Thanks for sticking with us and listening. And if you haven't stuck with us, thanks for finding us, and now you're stuck. And it's just been an absolute pleasure recording with the two of you and everyone else we've had the pleasure of recording with in the past, all the guests and former co-hosts. Really excited to go into a 3rd year. We're excited to take you with us. So happy New Year. All things good in 2025. We will see you next time on Test Case Scenario. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.